They say there's no such thing as free dinner. But the president of the Fiji College of General Practitioners, all the officials of the organization, all the good doctors that are here in the room. Every year we actually come, we have been for the past number of years coming to InterContinental Hotel for the Aiyaz conference. And I must admit I've never walked in such a solemn manner inside this hall that I did as I did earlier on this evening. Nor have I been accompanied with people adorned with such garb. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to firstly thank the President for the invitation, the organization for the invitation. I did not actually realize the seriousness of the occasion in respect of the awarding of the various fellowships, etc. So I look forward to participating in that. But of course, it's a huge recognition for those people who will be given those awards. Just as a reference to the Attorney General's conference, normally in the night before one of the nights, the first nights we do have the dinner, we normally invite somebody to give the after dinner speech. So it was in that light that I actually came here. So I had to come, I thought I have to come myself armed with sort of doctor jokes, etc. That's what normally people do. But your President has raised a number of issues, of course, which I was hoping to elucidate further tomorrow morning when I have the opportunity to speak. But I wanted to, before I don't want to delve into that too much, but hopefully talk about it tomorrow. But what I wanted to mention was that I'd like to firstly thank all of you for your efforts, and I know there has been some who have said that perhaps there could have been a lot more active participation, or invitation I should say, to those in private practice into the COVID-19 measures that were put in place. There is no doubt that the strict measures that we put in place right from day one, and I know those measures were perhaps not necessarily appreciated by many, not just in I'm talking about the medical profession, but all other professions around Fiji, even ordinary people. The lockdown of Lautoka, the lockdown of Suva, the lockdown of Soa in Vanuatu, and of course then there's specific areas in the squatter area in Suva too. But I think the reality of the matter is that if those measures had not been actually put in place, we would be in a different space altogether now. And the reality of the matter is that we are now able to hold ourselves out, that we are in excess of 190 days now, where we do not have any active community cases. What that only means, there are a couple of things that mean from there. Of course, is that there's less pressure on the medical system, less demand for resources, etc. Nonetheless, we are prepared for it. But it also means that we, as a government, are able to hold ourselves out in a lot better position when we talk to our development partners in respect of opening up borders. And that's critically important. As your President highlighted, that the economy, of course, in particular in the West, has taken a huge hit. We ourselves, of course, know revenue has depleted significantly when we have 40% of GDP contributed towards by the tourism sector, directly and indirectly. When you have revenue sources through STT, ECAL, VAT, duties, etc., and of course corporate tax that flows through those facilities, it has a huge impact on our ability to, of course, deliver services. So you have to be able to go out to the market and be able to say there are certain services you cannot compromise. You cannot compromise, for example, water, roads, essential services in hospitals, etc., which requires you to, of course, seek finances elsewhere, which is what we have done. It also requires you to seek finances offshore too, because of the fact that you don't have foreign currency coming in, and also your remittances actually does get depreciated or depreciates because family members offshore are also suffering. Australia lost 600,000 jobs in 1 month. That's 2/3 of our population. Sri Lanka just until recently I think it was for about 3 or 4 weeks, was actually COVID contained. And then one person, I think it was a foreigner, that came to a garment factory, and within 1 week they had 1,600 people with COVID-19. So they are the perils of, not necessarily maintaining your health measures. And what we need to do, of course, as a government, we're quite focused on ensuring that that medical situation that we are in continues, but at the same time are able to balance what we call the economic and health risks. And we need to do that. And so the fact that all of you have, in some way or the other, maybe not directly, some of you directly, have contributed to the medical situation that we're in, I'd like to thank you all for that. I also just wanted to highlight that perhaps, and again it's kind of going on the areas that I perhaps wanted to talk tomorrow, but all of you look so serious, I feel like cracking a doctor joke, so which I will. So there was a lady, and she was being approached by 2 gentlemen who obviously wanted to, win her affection. So one of them, on a daily basis, gave her a bunch of flowers, and the other one, on a daily basis, well, after the second day, he started giving her an apple. So this lady, after a week, was sort of baffled by this, and she said, well, said to the man who's giving the apple, why are you giving me an apple? And he happened to be an engineer, and he said, well, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Because the other guy was a doctor. So, bad joke, I'm not very good at that. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to very quickly say that there's no doubt what your president did say, that there needs to be collaboration and partnership with the private sector and the public sector. I mean, for me personally, I think as an association, and I've said this a couple of times, also I said it to those in the public service who are doctors, that I cannot understand the idea as to why they are 2 separate organizations. All of you are actually doctors, and you could actually have an umbrella body that represents all doctors in Fiji. You of course then have your subgroups within that. You could have those in the private sector, those who are working in the public health system, those maybe who are surgeons, those who may be from the West, women doctors, whatever the case may be. But I think it's always good to have an umbrella body, in particular for your profession. It'll make a lot of difference. That's something I think you can perhaps, food for thought for you. The second thing that I wanted to also mention was the opportunity to have that collaboration, which your president highlighted. And I agree with him that there needs to be far more collaboration. We've seen in other jurisdictions, for example, there are a number of doctors who work in a certain number of hours, in particular the senior doctors, who work a certain number of hours within the private sector, but then dedicated a number of X hours in the public health system. And I don't think we have necessarily sort of got there in a manner that's been fine-tuned. So I think there's opportunities there. The other issue that I also highlighted, your president highlighted about the TPF levy of 1%. I don't think anybody would in this climate want it to increase to 1.5%. In fact, as you know, that we have reduced FNPF contribution by employers from 10 to 5% to ease the burden on employers and hopefully recruit more people. But we announced it about two or 3 years ago, where 40% of that does go to ACCF. And the next bulk of it actually is to go towards medical services. And then 10% goes towards TPF. And the other 40% is we had thought of a scheme. We had approached Medicare in Australia. We sent a team to Medicare Australia. We had sought out information from New Zealand. And then we had also approached a number of private doctors to join this scheme. And essentially the scheme was, and we wanted to pilot it in Ba and Lambasa first up at that point in time. And the idea was that anybody in the community could go and visit their local doctor. We don't in Fiji have a culture of what we call family doctors. Some do, but it's predominantly those who are from the middle class and upper middle class people who can afford to go to private doctors on a regular fashion, because they can afford it. Or they can go to Oceania Hospital or other hospitals that are private hospitals. So there is no sort of culture of family doctor as such for everybody. So the idea was that if, for example, I'll just use Suva as an example. I know in the corner of Bellows Street and River Street there's a few doctors there. There's quite a few people. There's a huge catchment of people in that area. So if I wake up in the morning, and assuming I work as a labourer, and I wake up and I feel I've got a runny nose, rather than going and queuing up at CWM Hospital or some other health centre in Samambula, I actually can go to my local GP and visit the local GP, and government would fork out that visitation cost. We of course then had a agreement, or not agreement, we had a table. Of course, if I get an injection and things I need to get an injection, whatever medicine it is, there's a particular cost built into that too. And we actually wanted to do that and roll it out. And unfortunately, we did not get the buy-in. In fact, there were two doctors. One doctor in Ba had agreed. Now, the cost of a GP in Ba would be far less than the cost of a GP in Suva. And I don't mean, they have less professional skill sets than their counterpart, but I mean that the operational cost and the overhead cost. I mean, renting a premises in Suva, downtown Suva, sometimes can be 10 times more as renting a premises in Ba, or in Lambasa for that matter. Now, those two good doctors had actually agreed, but they said that they were then pressurized to withdraw because other doctors said, don't do it, you can get more. He said, that rhymed. Don't do it, you can get more. So we were actually stuck because we wanted to pilot that. And I think it's good that the President has raised this. And I would urge you all to please consider this over your dinner tonight and tomorrow in your discussions, how we can actually further this. Because really, purely from a business perspective, and this is one way to get your leg into the NCD space, if you're keen to get your leg into that space. Purely from even a business perspective, currently, those low-income people are not your customers. They are not your clients. They won't come to you. But if they know that they can come to you and your cost and your fee will be paid for basic consultation and injection and what have you, they will come to you. So, again, purely from a commercial perspective, you can have a lower margin but higher volume. A lot of businesses do that. I'm not saying you're a business per se. You are a professional. But the fact of the matter is that you can actually contribute. In particular, in this point in time, there are far more people, for example, who have lost jobs. Suva is slightly different. A lot of people who work in Suva are employed by government. Government is close to about 30,000 employees. None of them have had a pay cut. The people who work at this hotel who are serving you today, some of them work only on the weekends. Some of them lucky if they work on the weekends. They're actually rotating. Now there's actually a medical center out here, Zens I think. There are a lot of people who live around here who probably cannot afford to go to Zens. But if the private practitioners join that scheme, they would be able to go to Zens. They don't have to jump in a bus and go to the Dhuvu Health Center. It goes, I don't know how far away the next one over is, probably Loma Way. But please think about that. And we had in fact come up with a scheme. And what we do want to do is a few, pilot runs with it. There'll always be teething issues. I know that, for example, I was just talking to somebody from Australia last week precisely about this particular scheme. In Australia, it took them years to sort out the Medicare issues. A lot more complex situation, not necessarily, the same kind of level of simplicity, if you like. There are a lot more complex issues in Australia. You have the federal governments, you have the state governments, etc. But I think in Fiji it can be done, if there is a commitment on both sides to do that. And you will then, first of all, the way that I looked at it was that you will be able to provide services as medical practitioners to a group of people who actually want those services. you'll be able to help contribute to productivity levels in Fiji, because sometimes you have people, for example, going off to a medical center or to a local hospital, and they may just simply require a bit of a checkup, and they can actually go to work. But if they have to spend 4 hours in the waiting queue or even 2 hours, they go to work late. And if they're being paid on an hourly basis, then they get less money paid for that day. And thirdly, of course, we'll be able to then establish this family doctor approach. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but I've got some statistics that I'd like to share with you tomorrow, and we can talk a lot more about it. But I think it's a great opportunity. It would also, I think, give prominence to your organization if the Fiji College of General Practitioners came up and said, okay, we're willing to pilot this scheme, and maybe, the Western Division may be the ideal place to do that, or a couple of the towns to do that, because they are the people who have been hit the hardest. So I'll leave that as food for thought. And I'd like to, of course, have this discussion, like I said, tomorrow. Overall, I wanted to say that we are currently in discussions with our development partners in respect of how we can open up borders. As you know, we've done the Blue Lane Initiative. As you know, some of you may not necessarily know this, but the Blue Lane Initiative works in a manner that if we allow yachts to come into Fiji, and of course everybody has to do their 14 days of quarantine. But with the yachts, because they are actually isolated themselves, once they start sailing, we treat their sailing time as their quarantine period. So for example, it takes about 5 to 7 days to sail from Auckland Harbour to Port Denarau. As long as nobody gets on or gets off, depending on the size of the yacht, so it may say if it takes them 7 days to get to Denarau, we treat those 7 days as the quarantine period. When they come to Wailoaloa Bay Area, that's where they are. We have the Navy, you have the military there, and they do the quarantine. They serve another 7 days, and then they go for their test. As a result of that, we've got up to about 90 yachts to come into Fiji. And these people, when they come on shore, they come and stay at places like this. They drink our beer, they eat our vegetables, they go to market, they may stay at a hotel. Whatever the case is, there's an injection of funds into the economy. So we need to be constantly creative about that. This hotel actually is being used as a quarantine site, the upper part of this hotel, where those who choose to pay for their own quarantine services can do that too. And we've had, high net worth individuals who've also chosen to come to Fiji, and they pay for all those medical services. So we are currently in discussions, and the main issue is this. If, for example, a tourist comes from a particular country to Fiji and using the Bula bubble, and the Bula bubble essentially means when they get off the plane, before they get on the plane, a couple of days, a few hours before that, they need to do the COVID-19 test. If it's negative, they get on the plane. When they get to Nandi, they don't just jump in a taxi or whatever, there's dedicated transportation. So the bubble starts there, to what we call the VIP lanes. They will come to only designated resorts. And in those designated resorts, they will stay there, assuming they stay there for a week. All the staff who work at the resort will need to stay there also on premises. They cannot come in and out. And they have to serve 14 days. And then, assuming I've come from Australia, I stay 1 week at a designated resort, I go back on the designated transportation, and I go back to Australia. Because we are COVID contained, and because you have the VIP lanes in the Bula bubble, upon my return, I should not have to go into quarantine. Because no Australian or Kiwi or anybody else will want to come to 1 week's holiday in Fiji and then have to go back in 14 days quarantine in Australia. That's really the issue that we're trying to tackle at this point in time. And we're working through that. There's various protocols we need to adhere to, and we're trying to work out those issues. So that's the current situation regarding that. And I'd like to once again thank you all for your efforts. Thank you for contributing and looking after the health of Fijians who come and visit you. We need to be able to, of course, collaborate a lot more and a lot better, and I'm sure that we can work that out. Let's take a sort of partnership approach to it. And I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Medical Speaker, for sponsoring.
here.